So, hello everyone. This is the Wookiee cast, and we're sitting down with Chuck Wendig, the author of the Aftermath series in Star Wars. So, welcome to our podcast.
Thanks for having me. This is exciting.
We have so much to ask you, but first, I'd love to get into how'd you first get into Star Wars?
I mean, the classic way, like really, I was a little kid and it was there and I mean, I was only, I saw the first film pretty when I was very, very young, but I don't really have a recollection of that. But by the time Empire came out and, Return of the Jedi, like it was just, it's not that I had like a stable base of pre-existing science fiction information to influence me, but it totally blew my little mind and I was hooked from that moment.
Do you remember the first Star Wars movie you saw in theaters on the big
I
screen?
I do. It was Empire Strikes Back. I saw at a local drive-in theater, and my sister, she is older than me by a good bit, and was dating a guy, and so they were gonna drive to the theater and see this movie. And I don't know if our parents made them take brothers or what it was, but so he had his little brother and she had her little brother, which is me. And we went to see the movie. I don't know that they were watching the movie. But I was definitely watching the movie. And so that's a drive-in is weirdly like the perfect way to watch a Star Wars movie. And I kind of wish it was still a big thing across the country because it just felt so big and grand and really cool.
Oh, for sure. Something really interesting about Star Wars is that there's so much lore. Like
Yeah.
from even from Star Wars
Yeah.
Legends and New Canon, it's endless.
Yes.
So what was your process for building on that while also introducing new stuff?
It's like one of those things where they don't like when you kind of start, at least for me, things are probably different for different writers and different at different times of the sort of life cycle of being a Star Wars writer. But for me, they didn't really give me like a ton of either pre-existing information or rules as to what to do. I kind of knew the time frame and I knew where it needed to end as far as a trilogy would go. And I knew I really couldn't use any of the main characters, and it was supposed to be kind of a set of original cast. And the rest was like my magpie brain thieving all kinds of like Star Wars. Like, you think that it's going to be this like really specialized process that I'm going to go through and think about all the things that I want to include, but it was not a cogent sort of thing. It was just like I had been pickling and marinating myself in the world for so long in that story world that there was just so much that I wanted to pick and choose from. I mean, stuff from the Clone Wars cartoon, Rebels, other comics and books, just any games. My God, Knights of the Old Republic, just like anything I could find that still kind of sang weird songs in my heart was what I grabbed onto and tried to find a way to put it into the story.
I guess that's the really interesting thing about having some of the earliest novels within after the canon reset was that you really had an open field to play in, I guess.
I did, yeah, and part of it too was that they didn't have a lot of time and they didn't know what they really wanted, which is hard because it creates a lot of pressure, but it's also advantageous for me because like you just sort of like they say go, like there's just a starting gun, and you kind of got to run. So it was, I think, like the weird confluence was, I think September 4th was when I tweeted that I wanted to write a Star Wars book. And then, I knew there were new movies coming out, and they didn't have any real books planned. They were just starting to form their sort of the early stages of their publishing line for that first volley for Force Awakens, and they moved so quickly on it that I was meeting someone by October. I was meeting Shelley, the editor, and then I had a synopsis and an outline that I turned in. And I think I was starting to write the book by like January 1st, and it came out. And like initially, I had 3 months to write a first draft of the first
Oh,
book.
that's quick.
It is, and then they said we're going to move the publication date up from November to September. But that also means we need to move your deadline up by 2 months. So suddenly I had 1 month to write the book. So I pretty much had the month of January to write the first Aftermath book. I mean, obviously there was a period of time for editing and so forth, but it was a very, very fast turnaround. And that book came out, I think, on September 4th, 1 year after I tweeted about it, which is an alarmingly quick publishing schedule.
It's
Usually
a
it's like
great a coincidence as well,
It
almost.
is, and I always say like the fours were with me because I think it debuted at number four on the chart. So I was like, I felt like the fours were really with me on that one. But yeah, it was a weird process, but they didn't know what was up, so I just had to run and kind of grab all kinds of things that I thought were cool and try to make it work in that book.
I did want to ask, how did you name Akiva, if you remember? Just because it's such a like Star Wars-ish name, but
I don't know. Like that's the thing. I feel like because I was sort of brining myself in Star Wars for so long, you kind of just like run through names in your head, and like you said, it just sounds Star Wars. It just sounded Star Wars to me. So, yeah, you find the things you kind of like certain things that don't sound Star Wars, and you move them aside, and then the things that do, you claw onto them and make sure they have a place in the book.
every unique subject has its own Wikipedia article, and I've written a lot of them. So it's it's
Yeah.
been a real journey.
You are an unsung hero, as I said, for writers like me in the Star Wars
Uh,
world.
you did mention that you pulled over some Easter eggs from other content. So do you remember anything that you pulled over from Knights of the Old Republic or other Star Wars Legends things?
Yeah, like Knights of the Republic, obviously there are some HK-47 hints in there and some setting locations in there. Some force power stuff from Knights of the Old Republic. Clone Wars the cartoon, like Sugi and the ship that I think the Halo. Just all that stuff was sort of like Embo. I mean, Embo was just so cool looking and like you gotta have that. And initially it was weird because I had Embo, I believe Embo shows up in Empire's End. And initially there was a note that I wasn't supposed to use him. They're like, oh, we need him for something else. And then I was like, yeah, but can we make it work? Like they were telling me, I think it was a video game, and they're like, well, that's going to be set after. I'm like, well, then I should be able to use him here. And
Here.
by that third book that they were kind of starting to like be a little more like, all the pieces of the Star Wars universe were pulling tighter because they had less movement and ability to sort of change things. And so with Embo, I was like, can we do it anyway? And I was like, I kind of was like basically begging at this point. I'm like, I'm just going to keep it in there. And if you guys want to cut it, you can cut it. And it did stay in. And I think the thing he was in got canceled anyway. I don't even know what it was. So it was just like, I
I was gonna
weirdly,
say I don't remember him appearing in anything else.
no.
So
So sticking to my guns on like a trifling appearance, but I really just wanted that to be in there because like, I do think sometimes the fun of Star Wars is about having all these weird little side connections. And it's not just the nostalgia of like, oh, I see Han Solo and we like Han Solo and Han Solo was here, but all these little pieces of like not just this I want it to feel like a connected universe, but not necessarily a small universe, right? Like seeing Luke again and again makes it maybe feel like it's small, but then seeing all these side characters or little references or little Easter eggs, I think gives it the vibe that is both a bigger universe, but one that's connected by both obviously the threads of narrative and also one could argue, I guess, like the Force.
I think it's really important to show what normal people were up to during this time as well, because obviously we see on the big screen, oh, Jedi, Jedi, but
Yeah,
what about everyone else, you know?
right, right. Yeah, that was the key behind the interludes, like the initial, like when they pitched the story to me, like or pitched the idea of writing these books to me. The only thing they had was, well, what if we made it like Max Brooks's World War Z? Just a series of like disconnected pieces of like what's happening in the quote unquote aftermath of the Endor. And I was like, that's a really cool idea, but at the same time, like I felt like if I'm going to write Star Wars, I really want it to feel like Star Wars. I wanted to have that epic thrust, that epic journey. The not just like a series of news bulletins from around the galaxy, but I really wanted that kind of story. But at the same time, I loved the idea of having that sort of weird hop around the galaxy and talk about what's going on here and seeing it from a number of different perspectives and a number of different angles. And again, also that's a great place then to fold in these sort of other types of characters and references and Easter eggs, and giving them some depth and some richness that maybe they didn't get in different institutions or incarnations. And so that was the thing. I was like, I really was greedy in there, and I wanted my cake and eat it too. Like I wanted the epic scope of Star Wars, but I did like that little World War Z vibe. So that's how the interludes came about.
It kind of broke up the it broke it up a little bit and had a little bit of light and life because that's what we saw with um we saw Jar Jar Binks appear in one of them at the
Yeah,
juggler. So
the Jar Jar Binks interlude. Yeah, like
how did
that.
you decide his ending?
Uh
Just
yeah, that was like one of those ones where there was no I didn't reference it or make any suggestion to the editors that I was going to be trying to write a Jar Jar piece. I'm like, I'm just going to go for it because like I didn't necessarily always write all the interludes at first. I had maybe like notes, like here's a placeholder for an interlude that's going to take place here or here, whatever it's going to be. In his, I just kind of came upon like I just really wanted to do it, and I'm like, part of it almost like a stunt in the sense that like, can I write Jar Jar into this interlude and make it work? Not just like in a way that's like goofy or
cameo.
cool or cameo or campy or anything like that. Like, can I, in the tone of Aftermath, bring in with the current timeline where we're at, post Endor, can you bring Jar Jar in and make it work? And I didn't want to approach it, from that sort of like cynical, we hate Jar Jar thing, but I also didn't want to approach it like a um too Jar Jar vibey. Like you just had to
Right.
make it work in the place and time that it was. So I kind of went in like with empathy for the character, but not necessarily sympathy. Like we're just trying to tell a real story as to where he might be now. And I put it in there, and I was very glad that like the editors were like, when we saw the name Jar Jar show up, we were 100% sure we were cutting this, but like it worked, and we're gonna leave it. I was like, oh, thank God I did it. I did it.
One other interlude that comes to mind is those children, that brigade of children on Coruscant, they help Masameda, which I thought was
Oh
really
yeah,
interesting.
yeah.
We've had some editors wonder, like, what do you think happened to him after? Just as pure speculation.
Yeah, I don't know. Expect on the one hand, I want to say nothing good, but also Masmeda seemed to like be one of those like survivors, right?
I will
Like
do anything. I will
I will
be in
do
house
anything.
arrest.
Yeah, who do I need to sell out to keep
Yeah.
going? So like, especially you see, and I think it's what Mandalorian, where you start to see how like the Imperials are being folded back into the New Republic, both as a good or a bad idea. And I definitely feel like there's a vibe there that like Masa Matey was one of those ones who gets brought back in and is allowed to exist somewhere in a capacity beyond prison.
Uh, so we've also seen some of your characters get brought to life on the screen. So like Cobb Vanth and Temmin,
Yeah.
what other characters would you like to see in a movie someday?
I mean, like the whole Aftermath crew, I would love to just see in general, like in that period of time. I mean, Sinjir is just so
Yes.
much that I would love to see Sinjir there. But the whole crew, the whole gang would be a delight to see somewhere on screen somewhere someday. I don't hold out hope that that will happen, but one can dream.
Yeah, speaking of Sinjir, there's been like a little addendum to his story in that novel Last Shot. He ended up
Yeah.
getting married, and I thought that
Hmm.
was really nice.
It is
Just
sweet. I like that. Yeah.
seeing the way characters go on
Yes.
past their little.
Yeah.
Uh, so Mr. Bones also had a lot of personality.
Yeah.
What was your favorite part of writing his dialogue in that style?
Literally all of it. Every moment I get to write his dialogue was so much fun. Like, and he's a strong spice because so you can't really like overuse him. Like he's like that sort of yelling, insane murder bot drive. So you really can't have that too much, I don't think, or people, I think it becomes really too much. You can overdo that with Mr. Bones. So, uh, part of the challenge was not being like, well, what if I just write Mr. Bones all the time, always? Uh, can Mr. Bones narrate the entire book in all caps? Would that bother people? And it probably would. So, the fun was writing him, but the challenge was keeping him restrained, which I suppose narratively is also true. I'm sure all the characters were trying to feel like, how do you stop Mr. Bones from just like, I'll murder my way to this solution? It's like, no, no, don't do that.
Yeah, I guess when he rescues Nora on Jakku, it's like he was murder bot, but he also cared a lot about
Yes, yeah,
saving
lovable,
her.
huggable.
So,
Yeah.
yeah. Um, Someone asked, how do you think a conversation between Mr. Bones and HK-47 would go?
Well, that's yeah, because HK-47 has the value of seeming like a genteel in a way, like that's sort of the positing the question, like the way the dialect is phrased is very crisp and clean, deranged and insane, whereas Mr. Bones just kind of yells in the same way that I think sort of the battle droids do, which was part of the reason, by the way, that I wanted to do Mr. Bones, is because I thought, when you first see the Phantom Menace trailer, like way back when, when we had to go see like that Brad Pitt movie, the first trailer, whatever it was. So Meet Joe Black, and you see these droids appear and come out of their ship and wake up and stand up, and they look like nightmares. Like they're like weird. I mean, I know the ships are called vulture droids, but they all have the cut of like a skeletal bird. And they were sort of creepy and terrifying. And I was like, I'm interested to see what it is. And then you find out that, which is also delightful in its own way, they're just absolutely inept, complete. They're just Jedi fodder. They're just lightsaber chum. So I wanted to kind of still get back to that like mildly terrifying version. Like when you see that coming at you, you're like, that thing is a skeleton. So I do think HK-47 and Mr. Bones would either have a lot to talk about or they would just blow each other to pieces.
Yeah, for sure. Um, so kind of spurring off like the uniqueness of stuff. Cinder had so many different types of drinks during the course of the novels. He
Sure.
was always drinking something new. Um, so how were you inspired to just always have something new for him to drink?
I don't know. I
Like
just thought it
inspire
was,
his character.
yeah, it's just funny. It's just like, I feel like he's both someone who enjoys these drinks, but also is not a person of incredible routine. Like he's definitely like, in our modern sense, like there's a sense that he could be a foodie, like the kind that's always going out and be like, I want the different thing, the new thing. Sinjir has a lot of style, and I think that's part of the charm of that character.
I remember for one of his drinks, he said, "Oh, that tastes like motor oil," and then he just drinks it anyway.
He just drinks it anyway. Yeah.
Um, so when you were developing his character, how did come about? He has, a really unique name, so the three parts, but then also he has a lot of depth to him. He's not just like an Imperial. He left.
Yeah.
He tries to find love, and then he tries to be tough, but he has an attachment to the crew.
Yeah.
Um,
I mean, some of it is because like the whole crew is kind of a series of rogues, right? Like, in Star Wars, obviously you have Han Solo being your primary kind of rogue character in a sense. But this group is a bunch of sort of exiles and rogues and outcasts and weirdos. And so, trying to find that angle with Sinjir to be like, well, what's his deal? And giving him some complexity and some depth. And also like just from a practical standpoint, you're trying to find, just like with the interludes, you're trying to find eyes and angles into the story. And having a former Imperial gives the opportunity both for some really interesting character growth and that sort of thing, but also it gives you some, plot world building access that you don't have if you don't have that character. Without him, you sort of miss some of that, and you might have to find a different way to get that information across. But bringing him into the group not only then gives you that interesting sort of like character piece, but then also that portal into both the Empire then and what the Empire has become.
I also thought it was really interesting to see how he and the rest of the crew kind of brush up against the beginnings of New Republic bureaucracy because you kind of see Leia, she says, I want to go help Kashyyyk, I want to go help them. And in the Alliance, she probably would have had the authority to go do that anyway without any approval, but
Yeah,
she gets told no, she does it anyway, and it causes chaos.
it does. Yeah. Yeah, I think that's like a kind of one of those important things that it's not like, it's all fine now. Like, right? We're all fine here. It's all fine now. Now that the Empire is quote unquote defeated and the New Republic is quote unquote ascendant, everything is just going to be magically fine. Like, the Empire came from somewhere, right? And certainly Star Wars is about its cycles and repeating cycles. And I also imagine having a really big galaxy-wide government is probably a lot of work and creates for itself a lot of Byzantine crazy rules that are very difficult to parse and get past. And the part of the thing about Star Wars that separates it from something like I think Star Trek is you have these characters who are not rogues like Han Solo's a rogue, but they're roguish. They're all kind of going off script, right? They're rebels. They don't belong to any singular government. It shows the power of a handful of people to change the whole galaxy, right? And it's always a message I think that resonates well that like you have a lot of power both as an individual and as sort of a group of friends that you can do a lot of things and move mountains. But then like what happens in the context of like those people having to work inside a monster government, like a huge gargantuan government. And so I think it's one of those things both that presents again cool story angle, but then also from a plot angle, like we know that Jakku sort of, at least at that point in time, and still the information that was handed to me, that ended the empire. So you're like, how do you get to the First Order? What's the circumstances that lead to that sort of entity getting back in the door? And I think the big monolithic Byzantine nature of the New Republic maybe is one of those ways.
I thought it was really interesting that the it by the time of Empire's End, you probably had a bit more information. So Ray Sloan goes on to be one of the First Order's founders. So it kind of
Yes.
all ties together.
Yeah. And I'm sad that I haven't seen Ray Sloan since. Like, I don't know what happened. Hey, someone just do that. Someone handle that. Bring Ray Sloan back. Ray Sloan deserves Ray Sloan's time in the sun.
Yeah, I hope they kind of tie together. There have been a lot of aftermath nods in the
Yeah.
new seasons of other stuff. So
Yeah. So like I think Sloan is just primed for coming back in a Mandalorian or whatever that New Republic show was going to be that didn't actually happen. Somewhere in there, boy, I'd like to see.
there's kind of been a lot of tie-ins with, oh, what was it? Um, well, Nora and Wedge, they appear in another novel, Resistance Reborn. So how did you end up
Right.
putting them two together, if you remember?
It just worked. It just made sense. And I know there's sort of echoes of that in Legends too. It's just one of those things where Wedge is sort of beloved. Like for a character who gets alarmingly little actual screen time in the actual first three films, just a beloved character across the board in books and so forth. So comics. And I think, just Wedge having that kind of result and future is nice to think about.
Yeah, and then I've also written one of, or done the article work for one of Temin's aunts as well, which I
Oh
thought was
yeah.
really nice. They have a
Nice.
nice little house up there on the hill, and they,
Yeah, right. Yeah.
um, so there's a lot of like warmth and love in the novels, obviously, but it's also during wartime, so there's a lot of grief, especially when Nora loses Brenton. So how did you go about capturing characters' emotions in those scenes?
I think it's like kind of with separate from Star Wars with any book or any story you're trying to tell, you're just trying to find like for lack of a better term, the empathy for these characters. Like who are they and how did they get there? And when they're confronted with the current era situations, how do they react based on their past? And it's kind of just drawing that like respect for those characters and treating them like they're real people to some degree. I mean, within the context of a fun sci-fi, somewhat kiddish cinematic universe, like you still want to treat them like they're real people with real grief and real problems, but also real love for both their family and their for one another, and for a real desire to change and save the galaxy. So it's just kind of giving the characters as much respect as you can and letting them lead. Like I think the great thing about writing any of these stories, whether it's Star Wars or anything outside of it, is kind of being willing to discard the really rigid exoskeleton of plot. Like, well, I want to see this happen. This needs to happen. But then letting the characters kind of take the wheel. And I think when you do that, it just creates a more interesting organic experience and more believable too. And also then doesn't create a predictable mold, because every character at the core is a little bit unpredictable. Like that's why we love characters like that, is we don't always exactly know what they're going to do next. And so letting them drive is quite freeing.
Um, so also, so to kind of move on from that, what inspired Eliodie's name? Or I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly.
Oh yeah, yeah. No, I don't know. It was one of those names where like again, I did have a file full of names, like just things that sounded Star Warsy. And you're always trying to find that balance between like, do I use quote unquote, English to describe something, or do I create a full Star Warsian name? And there's always a mix. It just is like there's a mix in the original films. But that one was just one of those ones that had so much panache and drama to the name alone that I knew it needed a character robust enough to stand up to that name.
Yeah, they've continued to use the same pronoun set of these there for other
Yes.
characters within the universe. And I was recently going through an interview where someone mentioned that Jennifer Heddle used it for a character named Tipo. So just wanted to
Right.
ask about that.
Yeah. That was the I think the origin of that usage, which has presented, as I understand it, some difficulty in international markets where the languages don't as easily cleave to non-binary or unusual pronouns, which is a shame. Hopefully they're working on it. I know neo-pronouns can be tricky in German or whatever, but hopefully they'll find solutions there. I know that was kind of a sticking point for those translation issues, which I don't control. Unfortunately, I don't have any say
Oh,
over,
for sure.
but hopefully that got
They've
resolved.
gotten better at it in the future, I think,
That's
especially
good.
with High
Good.
Republic and everything.
Good. Good. They needed to. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, and for what it's worth, the Wikipedians, we really do appreciate that your early inclusion of a lot of queer characters. It was really meaningful because a lot of novels back then didn't.
Oh, thank
Um,
you. Yeah. It was a thing that was, I thought, just felt like the right thing to do, and it obviously creates just a cooler, richer universe, both for the one we live in here and also for the one out there.
so, um, sorry, just kind of
But you're fine. Take your
find.
time.
There's a moment in Aftermath Empire's End where the Emperor is believed there's some mysterious force out there. Did we ever
Yeah.
find out what that is?
Hmm. I don't think so. I don't. I know there's like a theoretical ties to Skywalker, the Rise, but they didn't tell me any of that. There was no. I think there's people have speculated that somehow like I knew things that were coming, or I did not. Did not tell me any of that. And I don't know if they knew because of the way those movies are written. But I do know that the books were on the desk of Chris Terrio, and he did refer to having read and maybe mined those books for some ideas in terms of Rise of Skywalker. So I don't know if what he was hearing and feeling out there was Exegol. I don't know. That's certainly possible. At the time, all I knew is there was a Snoke, and I was like, well, maybe it's a Snoke. I don't know what it is. So like we're trying to keep it, that's always the trick. You're trying to like operate on not having all of the information, which maybe they do or do not have, but they're certainly not sharing with people in comics and books necessarily. And so you're kind of trying to like give enough information that could fit the situations that are coming while also not being so vague that it's like, I don't know, things are happening, everybody. And then you're like just leaving giant question marks that can never seem like they get answered. So it's a hard tightrope to walk.
I guess because we do see like Leia's pregnancy, so you knew about that and how Kylo would
Yes.
come to be, but
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. So the
well,
goal is,
before they broke up. But yeah.
well, right. Yeah, the goal is always to have Kylo be born in those books. Though I recall like in the draft of the third book they were in, suddenly like we're not going to show the birth, and I was like, well, but we've been sort of going for that. So can we? It's kind of one of those things where I was like, well, this is kind of a hill I feel like I want to die on in terms of the draft. Like we've been promising it more or less for these two books, and it feels like in the third book it needs to be a thing, and they did relent in that regard.
Is there anything else that you can remember that you really wanted to have stay in the novels that
Oh gosh, I don't know. I talked about Ambo and Sugi's ship. Yeah, no, I don't know. I mean, the weird thing is kind of every bit of it was always something that I really wanted to have in there. It was those books were for me kind of just a love letter to the galaxy, that story world. I grew up with it, and it affected me so much that I really was honored to have any chance to contribute to it, even just a little postage stamp of that as my own, canon or not canon or whatever it ends up being. I was really happy to be included. So just every page is sort of a desire to have the things that I loved be put into that book.
sure. I know you said that you had only a small amount of time to write the first novel, but did you have a little bit more time to write the
Yeah,
follow-ups?
the two subsequent books were at a much saner timetable. Yeah.
Um, there's also like some smaller things. There's a lot of characters that we meet in the interludes. I don't know if you remember the specifics of all of them.
I almost certainly don't. I fade in and out on a given day, but I've written so many different non-Star Wars things since that my brain barely contains.
Yeah, no, there's definitely so much lore within all of them. But one other question I had was, do you remember how the idea came about to have like just a meeting of all of these kind of almost, I don't want to call them second-rate Imperials, but they're all the Imperials that survived after the Death Star. How did the idea to come about to have them all just kind of gather in one spot?
Yeah, it's like we just for like strategically, that feels like that's what would happen. Like they're if they feel like the Empire needs to be ascendant, or even if they're just going to survive, then having some solidarity while also being backbitey and betrayally, made some sense. But I mean, also there's some echoes there of too with World War II, or really any sort of regime that falls. Like the survivors tend to try to find each other and sometimes go elsewhere to regather their forces and maybe redouble their efforts to reclaim what was lost. And usually they can't. And then usually once they realize that they can't, they start to eat each other, metaphorically speaking. I don't think the Imperials were actually eating each other. The Ewoks were maybe eating them. I don't know. But yeah, so I just felt like that was a good place of tension and drama. And also just like strategically, that's probably what they would do. But they're not healthy people and they're not a healthy organization. So you knew that meeting wasn't going to go super swimmingly at every moment.
I guess that's kind of what happens with Rey's power struggle, where she's trying to vie for control, but she doesn't quite have it.
Right, right. And then she thinks she's going to have it. And then there's, of course, Rax is in play and it becomes a whole different kettle of fish.
And he has a really interesting backstory as well that you kind of delved into how he, was an orphan of sorts and just.
Yes. Yeah. And it was funny because initially one of the ideas was there would be Thrawn would be that character, that we would have Thrawn in that role. Because then initially they were like, we don't want to do anything with Thrawn, we don't want to touch Thrawn. But then I think Thrawn got put in obviously into the Rebels situation and maybe into the future sort of canon. And obviously I know where he is now in terms of Ahsoka and everything, but I don't know what happens from that point forward. But the initial idea was maybe it would be Thrawn, and that was a very short-lived potential idea. But I think he was in the initial outline for like Empire's End, and then once that was not the case, it was like, all right, we need to, um, rubber meets road here. We need to have a proper antagonist, both for the sort of galaxy and our main characters, but also for Rey as well.
Yeah, so kind of like the big battle of Jakku, we've seen it from a lot of different perspectives in the recent years, but the Aftermath novels were the first to depict it, um, kind of. So
Yeah, I think it is a little. Is there a glimpse of it in Lost Stars? Do I remember correctly?
yes,
Yeah.
the main characters they're struggling to basically.
Yeah, and I think that's all I had to go on at that point. If I remember correctly, was both the bits from Force Awakens and then from Lost Stars. I think was all I really had, and maybe a few notes here and there, but mostly it was kind of just like a let's figure it out.
Let's figure it out. Let's see what
Let's
happens
figure
with
it
massive
out.
space
Yeah, let's
battles, and
figure it out.
then see how all of that debris came to be on Jakku's
Yes,
surface
that
in
was the
Force
thing. Like I
Awakens.
saw the aftermath, literally the aftermath of that was just like a desert littered with broken ships.
And then I guess in Rise of Skywalker, we saw all of the aftermath of the Death Star just being debris everywhere. So it's kind of like a
Right.
parallel almost.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, but yeah, I, sorry, I have a lot of like just weird questions because the
You can
novels
ask them.
are.
Sure. No promises I have good answers, but I'll feel.
I wrote several characters from the interludes, the Tafral family and Corwin Ballast. I was curious, a lot of those characters, they come from planets just mostly basic like Salakami and stuff. I don't know if we ever knew what species those characters were.
Yeah, I don't know either, technically. I don't know that it's actually identified.
That makes sense.
Yeah, that's a
Because I guess interestingly for Corwin Ballast at least, we see him, he's just dead on Jakku. He's like, I don't care anymore. And then he's like, the ship appears in the sky. He's like, oh, I don't want to be here anymore.
that's
Send me
it.
away.
Yeah. Exactly.
Um, send me away. But yeah, I think that's all I had, unless you had anything else that you'd love to talk about from your work on the books or anything.
No, it's just an honor to write those books, and hopefully people will continue to read them until going forward. I know certainly some books end up beloved, and it'd be great if these were those. But just I'm happy to have been there for the time that I was there.
They're being reprinted later this year.
Oh,
So
nice. Okay, that's good. I didn't know that. See, why I'm on the call with you. You know what's up.
yeah, they're reprinting all of the canon novels, so we'll
Oh,
be really
wonderful.
excited to do that. But
Do they have new
is
covers or anything, or are they just gonna?
the
Is
same
that?
covers, they're just the new standard size of Star Wars
Oh,
novels.
yeah. Okay, that makes sense.
Is there any work that you have coming out that you'd like to point people towards?
Oh, I have the paperback of my horror novel Black River Orchard is coming out in June, and then in the fall I have a new middle grade called Monster Movie, which is literally about a horror movie that comes alive and is itself a monster.
All right, thank you. Thank you for sitting down with us.
Oh yeah, thank you. Thanks for
And
having me.
to our audience, thank you for watching the Wookiee Cast, and we will catch you soon.
Thanks.